In the reading corner today, it's my absolute pleasure to be welcoming Jenny Downham and Louis Hill, mother and son, who've written together the book Let the Light In. Jenny I spoke to almost 20 years ago on the publication of her debut young adult book, Before I Die. I can scarcely believe it's that long. I'm so pleased to be welcoming you back, Jenny.
Thank you. It's lovely to be back.
And Louis for the first time.
Happy to be here.
So there is an obvious question to start with, and maybe that is where I will start, and that is why you decided to write a book together.
We had written something together before we wrote this book. So obviously I write novels. Louis has experience writing plays and short stories. And we decided about 4.5 years ago now to write a TV series together. So we wrote a pilot for that and we had such fun. And it wasn't something either one of us had done before. And we sent it around to various people. It garnered some interest. But when COVID hit, Louis bubbled back at home and it just struck us as a good idea to do something creative together. And this book started out really as a series of writing challenges. We would just set each other tasks every day and we just kept going.
Louis, tell us something about the kind of challenges that you set.
Well, they'd kind of be really anything and everything that we could think of. There might be something simple, write a page about this thing, anything. And I think the thing that was interesting about them is the same characters started to crop up over and over again. And that's kind of where Leah and Charlie, the protagonists from Let the Light In, came from. They just kept reappearing. We would do these challenges and it started to feel, as the weeks and months went on of setting each other these challenges, something was kind of happening. There was a project slightly starting to emerge, and that was sort of the genesis of how we kind of turned to one another and went, should we? Is this? Are we? Should we? Is this a book? And we went from there.
So Let the Light In, it's a story about a family in trouble. It's told from two points of view, the girl Leah and the boy Charlie, brother and sister in this story. From hearing you talk, it sounds as though one of you wrote the part of Leah and the other wrote the part of Charlie. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. And that was another thing that became very obvious, that I was writing Leah and Louis was writing Charlie. And Louis writes very differently from me. He's much quicker for a start. And he suggested that we write a chapter a day and pass it to each other. So I would write a chapter one day, pass it to him, and he would respond. And my instinct was, well, I take about 6 months to write a chapter. That's absolutely not going to happen. But it was Easter and the weather was nice. And I just thought, oh, all right, let's see. And what was amazing was that because I had to stop caring about every single word and the fact that somebody would read it when it was so fresh, we ended up with something that was very alive and responsive to what had gone the day before. And that was our kind of very, very first draft.
Yeah, it was such a good way, I think, of removing any discomfort about sending one another early work, because when you're writing with another person, it's just part of the job. You have to send them work that is inevitably early stages or quite raw, and that can make you feel so nervous as a writer. It's so revealing. And by doing a chapter a day, we threw all caution to the wind and just went, look, there you go, here's some ideas. And we got really good at looking past what was early work and just looking at what was kind of in there, what the kernels of ideas were that were embedded in there. It felt really useful for just that alone.
So it sounds, Jenny, as though you learnt something. In spite of all your experience as a writer, you learnt something from this process. Has that in any way impacted how you will write going forward?
I really wish I could say yes, that it has made me much quicker. I'm not sure it has. I've never written anything with another writer apart from Louis before. And what I discovered with writing with Louis was, I think I err on not the cautious side, but every single word has to be I don't know how to make it any better before I pass it to somebody, but whether it's my writing group, whether it's an editor, whether it's the publisher. And that means I don't send work, I fiddle with it. And that's sometimes not a good idea. Sometimes it's finished and it's ready to go. And it's actually harder then to dismantle it if you need to in the editorial process. So I think that what Louis has taught me, and what I hope I do take on going forwards, is that those kind of quick vignettes are a very useful way to discover whether you're going down the right path or not. I worry that given we wrote about 7 drafts in the end, and it did take us 3 years, that I've given him some of my plodding editorial slowness, but he'll have to answer that.
That really is my obvious next question, is whether your writing process, Louis, has adapted or changed as a result of working with Jenny.
Inevitably, definitely, yes. Mum has an incredible capacity to excavate depth when it comes to character. I think she is like a dog with a bone in that if you think you know what a character's motivations are, she is so good at going, let's go a level deeper. Let's go a level deeper than that. Okay, a character wants money. Okay, well, why do they want money? That's the thing they want. Oh, it's because they want independence and responsibility. Well, why do they want that? You go a level deeper. And it was so kind of enlightening, really, to have somebody constantly push you to make sure that your character is as clear and as human and as real as possible throughout a process. And I think that speaks to what she might call plodding, I might call just discipline and thoroughness and patience with the process.
Sounds like a partnership made in heaven. And I'm not going to ask you what the most difficult thing was about working together, but I did want to just make an observation that as a reader, I couldn't tell who'd written what. It really melded together beautifully. I do have a question about that, and that is whether you had to work at that aspect of smoothing it out so that it sounded like one author writing the book.
Calibration was really, really important to us. And for about a year, we didn't really edit. And then there came a point when we decided to send each other's chapters back with some notes. And obviously that's a tough thing to do because, you love this person you're writing with. And it kept striking me that as a mother, if your kid brings back a picture of a rainbow from nursery, it's the best rainbow ever. It's amazing. You're a genius. But this was my career and we had to be as professional as possible. And I really worried about my parental head and my professional head and not getting them muddled. So I was possibly sometimes more ruthless than I needed to be with the red pen. But what also amused me was that after about a year, Louis got very confident with his red pen, sending me back edits. And I think because we edited each other's chapters, that calibration was slicker than it might have been if we hadn't done that.
Yeah,
So interesting.
I can definitely confirm that none of my early work was put on the fridge with a large smile. I think we did quite a good job of ensuring that we were as honest with each other as we could be. And I think to that calibration point, probably partly we are mum and son. There is just some already connection there that meant that we were able to quite quickly slip into ensuring that these voices sounded and remained consistent. We always wanted them to sound like two characters, but not necessarily as though it was written by two people.
I know that you both have in your background theatre, drama, acting, and I wonder whether that in any way plays into the kind of writers that you are.
I think, yes, definitely. It was probably ended up being a more significant part of our writing process than maybe we anticipated. Our shared background in acting meant that we had this shared vocabulary that was on top of that of writing. So we were able to discuss things in a way that you might discuss theatre, that you might discuss performing on camera. We were able to talk about characterization or motivations in a way that just felt really easy and shared and easy to understand, and almost like an additional language on top. And then I think I write and think quite visually. I often think in terms of where the camera lens will be, and to be able to discuss that really fluidly with the person you're writing with made the process a lot easier for me. And then I think also finally, don't think we were that worried about looking silly in front of each other. We have both separately been in rehearsal rooms, that first stage of rehearsing a play where you're with a group of people you don't know and you just have to look silly. You just have to take some big swings and you have to just give stuff a go. And I really felt that carried over to this process. We just went straight for it and didn't worry about whether things were right or wrong, just whether they were interesting.
Let's dive into the book and say a little bit more specifically about it. Ginny, I wanted just to lead us in. Could you set the book up and give us your first reading? I know you're going to read for us.
Sure. I'll read a little bit from Leah's first chapter. Leah. I check how I look in the bathroom mirror. The flickering light bulb doesn't help. I run my fingers through my hair and retouch my lip balm, trying to see myself through Alex's eyes. He told me once that I looked like the girl in a painting by some Russian artist. He showed me a picture on his phone. She had pale skin, dark hair piled up, a book in her hand. I liked him thinking I looked like a famous painter's muse. It's true I can look pretty when I try. Tonight I've used a foundation with tiny sparkles in it, and mascara. It's like putting on a disguise. I almost look sophisticated. It's like there used to be a secret, unnoticed Leah who I hardly dare believe in, and now she's come to life. I'm no longer just the boring schoolgirl, the reliable daughter, or the person to turn to when the washing machine breaks. I'm so much more, because of Alex. I squint at myself in the mirror and imagine his eyes grazing the length of me when we meet in an hour's time. You, Leah, are the best secret of my life. The spell's broken by Abby ramming the bathroom door with her little fists, demanding I let her in to pee, and further broken by Charlie, bolting out of his bedroom when he spots me attempting to sneak downstairs wearing my favourite jacket. He skids to a halt. Where are you going?
I'm really interested in, Leah is 17,
Yeah.
going on 18 very shortly. She's looking after the family because her mother is suffering from deep grief and is unable to do the mothering that she would. And Leah has aspirations to go to university. So she's really on that cusp of adulthood. And 50 years ago would have been considered an adult actually at that age. And so I'm really interested in the perceptions that we have of her as a character. Reading her as an adult would be very different from maybe a teen of her age reading her character. And I was very much aware of that while I was reading, and also trying to remember my 17-year-old self. I wondered whether all of that complexity around Leah and her character was part of your thinking too.
It was very important to us writing these characters that it was complex. Louis talked about the strata of motivation earlier, but it's also really important to us that every character, even, the baddies, are fully motivated in why they do things. Leah, as you say, is a carer. The family isn't provoking attention because she and her brother are managing their little sister, which in many ways it isn't uncommon, but because the kids are not regularly absent from school and because Leah is very academic and doing well, they are passing below a radar. In terms of her relationship with an older man, it was something, writing her character, I was very keen to explore from lots of different angles. So she is demanding happiness. It's the one thing she has when the rest of her life is very challenging. And I think society is often quick to judge young women and their sexuality, and especially if they're demanding happiness, in the way that she is in this book. And there's another lens to look through, which is that she's vulnerable and she is therefore susceptible, and possibly the older man, should have withheld his gaze, but he doesn't. And being able to look at something as complex as that in a safe space is something that felt really important to us to offer young readers. There are lots of other points of view about this in the book when the relationship becomes public, so that other characters have very strong and varied opinion. And we hope that that would promote discussion. And I think something that we kept saying to each other is that this actually does happen in real life. We know lots of people this has happened to. We can't ignore it away and pretend it doesn't happen for young people, but what we can offer is a really honest and hopefully sensitive engagement with it.
I did put in my prompt questions because I thought it was interesting whether we would have felt differently if Alex, the older man, he's 29, whether he hadn't had a wife and a child, would we have felt differently?
Oh, well, you see, there's the beginning of the debate. Would we have done? I think possibly yes. But again, I mean, the baby and the wife were always there from the beginning. And we toyed with some of these questions. We thought, look, she's 17, should we make her 18? But every time we tried to sort of mix the levels, it got rid of a lot of the drama. So we made life challenging for ourselves because obviously she is still considered, not an adult to some degree. And by giving her such complex challenges, it just meant that it became a much more interesting story, and hopefully the discussions around it will be more interesting as well.
Louis, you wrote the part of Charlie, and I think you're going to read a little bit of his story to us as well.
Yes, so this is from Charlie's first chapter. Mum, I say softly. Mum, you awake? She makes a moaning noise like waking up is the worst idea in the world, then flicks her eyes open and straightaway shuts them again. Mum, gorgeous boy. There's sleep and slowness in her voice. I step into her bedroom. It's dark, and the air has the weight of a room that's been occupied too long. I wondered if you wanted something to eat. Let me look at you. Shall I turn on the light? No, leave it. She squints at me in the gloom, seems to reassure herself it really is me, and then closes her eyes again. Not hungry then. What have you been up to? She asks. Drawing? Not tonight, Mum.
He's such a lovely character. Leah really wants him to start stepping up and taking a little bit more of the responsibility from her, but he has struggles. Tell us a little bit about his struggles.
It was always really important to me that Charlie's struggles, so many of them are internal. He has a great deal of difficulty in his life around him, but the ways in which he struggles with his own mental health permeate his story and his character. And that was something I really wanted to be a core part of his journey to be. It's only as I've moved through my 20s now that I personally have started to be able to talk more about my mental health with friends or family or in a more public way. And I really saw the value in writing a character that people might read that shows the benefit of engaging with that side of ourselves more. And for Charlie, he shares his grief with his family. He has the same kinds of grief in a lot of ways. His mum is an example of somebody who's very still with it. She is stuck in time almost with how she feels. With Charlie's grief, it's a lot more kinetic, I think. There is movement. He is almost running away from what he feels, trying to cover it up, but without spoiling it too much. There are definitely buds of positive ways of handling how he feels. There are the shoots of good coping mechanisms. And I think also for Charlie, there are definitely themes of masculinity. What is it to be a young man? What is it to be a young man in London? What is it to be in a world where there is a pervasive toxic masculinity, for want of a better phrase, that talks about how you must always be earning money or be grinding or be, a provider in a very traditional sense. And he's in an environment where he doesn't have to do all those things, but he sometimes feels the pressure to do them. And, you mentioned that Leah wants him to take on more responsibility, and she does in a loving way, but I think he interprets that often as a need to put himself under a great deal of pressure. And so I really wanted to show how he handles that and how he can handle it in a positive way and a negative way.
There's actually a third sibling in this story, a younger sibling, so she doesn't have her own narrative or her own narration. And I'm just interested in what she brings to the story, because it's really important that she's there. Jenny?
Yeah, so Abby is 7, and when tragedy struck this family, she was she was under 4, and therefore her memory of it is very different from her older siblings. She is the book's optimist. She is the truth sayer. She asks questions that perhaps make the other characters question themselves. In terms of the title of the book, she does bring a lot of the light to the book. They both adore her. So there's a lot of love in this family. And it was very important to us that despite the difficulties, Mum is not a parent who doesn't want to parent. She isn't a mum who doesn't love her kids. She's really trying to parent. And Abby is very well loved. And I guess that a lot of her energy and her light comes from the fact that despite the tragedy that happened in her family, she is held up, buoyed up by the rest of them. We loved writing her. She brings a lot of the comedy as well.
Was she there right from the beginning as well?
She was. Once upon a time, she had a voice. She was at the very, very early stages. She was a point of view character, but that didn't last very long.
Just listening to you, Jenny, that's 3 years that this family have been stuck in this situation caused by grief. So Leah would have been around 14 when she was taking on those responsibilities. And I did want to just think a little bit about this issue of young people as carers who are forced into taking those adult roles, but it's unseen. You say she doesn't provoke attention, was the phrase that you used. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so she provides practical support. Charlie does as well. Housework, cooking, shopping, those kind of things. She manages the family budget, but she also cares for her siblings and her mother emotionally. And Charlie does a lot of that as well. And there are thousands of young carers, and a lot of them are not even on any kind of radar because they don't even know they're carers. I'm sure if you asked Leah if she was a carer, she'd probably say she wasn't. And as we said earlier, schools, their resources are limited, and if a child isn't provoking attention, they probably won't be receiving it. And families like that can easily fall into debt and spiral downwards, as this family does. One of the impulses for me to make her a carer was, I actually have a friend who was a learning mentor, and her job was to support the kids in a school environment. And she used to tell me a lot of stories about kids who, it was discovered much later, had fallen below the radar, and the amount of things that they were doing meant that it was almost as if there was a shame attached to it, that they were not able to provide for themselves because they were providing for the family, and it was leaking out in ways that perhaps were not immediately recognizable as somebody who was under that sort of pressure at home. One of the things that was really important to us was that we have highlighted community in the book. There are neighbours, there are friends, there are teachers, and there's a lot of secrecy, which is to do with the shame and people withholding and masking their own needs to help other people. But by the end of the book, there is also a lot of, the beginnings of communication, the beginnings of an opening up to trusting other people to support you if you need, the beginnings of asking for help. And that was really important, that we showed there are ways out of this, and to highlight what some of those ways out might be, which are readily available, which is, talk to a good teacher, talk to a neighbour that you trust, talk to a family member that you trust. But we're not saying it's easy.
And of course, that's all about making choices about who to talk to and who to turn to for help. Charlie actually makes some choices or turns for help to people who are going to take him further into problems. Sometimes we feel that we have no choice and it forces us into circumstances that we might want to avoid. Can you tell us a little bit more about Charlie and his way of trying to deal with the difficult situation that they're in?
We wanted to show his choices as ones that could reasonably happen to all kinds of different people. We wanted to show that he's also a human, real character, hopefully, and some of his choices start off for good reasons, but also have foundations in some selfishness. He's a 15-year-old boy. I have been a 15-year-old boy. 15-year-old boys can think about themselves an awful lot. And I think it was really important to show that Charlie has all of these facets to him, that he's, I hope, really likable, and I think he's a good person. But that doesn't mean that he can't stray from that path a little bit. And certainly when you're in particular situations, as an adult, I've started to realize so much clearer just how much everyone is on balance trying their best in life. We are all just trying to make the most of our messy, wonderful, terrible, excellent lives, and that casting aspersions or judgment on others just because of that is often not the best thing. And so for Charlie to go from a loving household, but one that has its problems, and to find himself in a position and to find himself surrounded by people who offer him some independence, some power, some money, it hopefully creates an obstacle within him that anyone can relate to a version of it. We really wanted to show some of them are morally grey. Some of it was for good reasons and some of it was for bad, but ultimately it's about how he handles the outcome of those choices that I think really defines who he is.
One thing that was really important to me was the theme of art and music and literature and how that runs through the story. There are lots of perceptions around who art is for. And of course, within your book, you have this scene quite early on with Leah in the art gallery helping to host the opening of the first show of that gallery, listening to the conversations around art and why people want art in their lives. And there's sort of contrast between that and the authenticity of a feeling response. But it's threaded through in so many different ways, not only explicitly in that way, but also just the way that you write and how colour comes into things all the way through. I'd just like to hear a little bit more about that from your perspective. Jenny, could you say something about that?
From the very beginning, Leah was academic and loved literature. Charlie loved drawing. And I'm not quite sure where it came from. Personally speaking, my parents left school at 14 and were both from very working class backgrounds, but I grew up with an expectation that I would do well. I would go to university because it was my father's ambition that his kids did better than he did. And when I was at school, there were free music lessons, there were theatre companies visiting, there was a well-stocked local library, free education to university level, as well as parental encouragement. And a lot of people with backgrounds where, there aren't books in the house, for instance, tend not to have that amount of support. And when my kids were growing up, some of their friends had similar backgrounds, and you can kind of see that a lot of that stuff that I had at school is not there anymore, but that the barriers faced by working class people when trying to access arts are so wide and so varied. But that doesn't mean that people from those backgrounds are not hugely interested in that or are creative. And so it felt very important to us that there was these people were authentically working class, but they were also creative, loved reading. Leah was taken to libraries by her dad. Leah's dad taught her to read. That's in the book. And you're right, the way that Charlie particularly views the world is very visual. He feels and sees things which are not about learning how you're supposed to look at art, but are very sensory. So yeah, it just felt that humans are unique in their drive to creativity, and it's about paying attention to the world, and it was that we wanted to give them.
I think it's particularly important, in a climate where we're talking about meeting people's basic needs, food and shelter. Actually, access to art is a basic need as well. And I think that is often forgotten.
I completely agree with everything that's been said. The inclusion of art as a central theme within this book, it just felt kind of right and natural because, as you say, it is such a basic need. If we look at during the pandemic, when everyone was locked down, what is it everyone spent all their time doing? Watching films, watching theatre online, playing games. It was a basically just everyone spent their time absorbing art in all kinds of ways, learning new skills. People learn instruments, people learn how to draw, people bought easels. But I think we wanted to show to these characters that we wanted to show to people that these characters' artistic instincts are just inherent to who they are. Art threads itself throughout the book in all kinds of ways, not just as a way of making money or as a way of expressing emotions. It kind of touches every part of their lives. And I think we also wanted to show that it's not just the people who do the art that it's important for. Charlie draws, he paints, he engages with creating things, but Leah is able to stand and look at a piece of art and have feelings about it and absorb it and interpret it without being somebody who draws herself.
The title is Let the Light In. So no matter how difficult things get in the story, the title is giving us hope that we're going to get to a lighter place as we move through the story. When did the title come to you? Was it at the end of the process?
Yes, it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was. I'm always convinced that a title is in the book, and it doesn't matter if you don't find it until the end. All you have to do is look in the book, and your title will be there. And we came up with so many titles which were in the book, and felt it could be any of them. And we eventually decided that one that had more light in it, that, as you say, gives us a clue that despite the fact this is a book that, if you read the blurb on the back, might seem like, oh, it's about a family struggling. I don't know if I want to read that. There's a lot of joy in the book. There's a lot of laughs and ultimately a lot of light. That was important.
Well, we've covered quite a lot of ground in our conversation, but I'm always concerned when I talk to writers like yourselves that I might not have given you the opportunity to say the things that you really want to say about the book. So is there anything else that we haven't touched on that it's really important that we tell our listeners? No.
No, so comprehensively covered so many of the important themes. I mean, I think I feel like our book is very seen. I feel like you have really seen it, and so no, for me, that really feels like quite a lot of the stuff that feels so important to let the light in.
Yes, I agree. Your questioning was a delight.
Well, the book is also a delight. It does let the light in. It's very, very readable, and I really, really cared about the characters in this story, and that's the most important thing. Can I just say thank you so much for joining me in the Reading Corner today?
Thank you for having us. It's
Thank
been
you so
a
much.
pleasure.